"Spread your legs and let me see," Mountain Man ordered the fat outcast, but his true purpose was, "Leave her tied and let the town judge," Mayor Harold Blackwood snarled, lifting his whip so the winter sun flashed along the braids. "Ravencrest won't feed a thief, especially not this greedy little glutton." The square erupted. Rotten cabbage thudded against the wooden chair where 19-year-old Violet Hayes sat bound hand and foot, her cheeks blotched with cold and humiliation. A plank over her head announced the verdict before any trial. Fat monster, crime, stealing food. Snow hissed along the packed dirt like 1,000 small insults. Men jeered from saloon steps. Women folded their arms, lips pinched, as if scandal could freeze a soul faster than December. Someone pitched a stone that clipped Violet's shoulder. She flinched, but kept her chin tucked, as if the shape of her body might make a smaller target if she could only fold into it. "I didn't steal," she whispered, breath feathering in the cold. "It was refuse, what you'd thrown to the hogs." "Hear that?" the mayor barked, sweeping a gloved hand. "She calls our town hogs. 3 days and 3 nights she sits, no food, no water. Let her learn the price of taking what isn't hers." A drunk lurched forward and clawed at the shawl bunched at Violet's throat. Laughter cracked around the square like rifles. "Strip her bare, and we'll see how sorry she is," he crowed, pawing for a knot in the rope. The whip cracked, but not from the mayor's hand. The drunk howled as his wrist was yanked away and slammed against the chair post. A shadow eclipsed the gallows frame of sky above Violet, tall enough to blot the light. The stranger's coat was wolf gray, heavy with rime, his beard dark with wet snow. Gideon Stone, some swore his name like a warning, others like a prayer, stood with one palm flat on the chair back, the other clamped on the drunk's arm, as if bone were a trivial puzzle he might decide to break or spare. "That's enough," he said, voice low and cold as creek ice. "You want justice? Then start with truth. Who saw her steal?" Silence fanned out. The mayor's jaw worked. No voices rose, no witness stepped forward. "Ravencrest doesn't answer to stray mountain trappers," Blackwood hissed. "Stand aside." Gideon's eyes, storm gray, unreadable, held the mayor's a long beat. "Then untie her and charge her proper, or untie her and let her go. But you'll not touch her." "Men!" the mayor snapped. 3 moved. Gideon moved faster. He shoved the drunk away, set his knife in 2 quick strokes, and the ropes fell from Violet's wrists. He slid his coat from his shoulders and draped it over her like a small private room where shame could not enter. His hand was careful beneath her elbow, his words meant for her alone. "Stand if you can. I'll get you out of here." Around them, the crowd shifted, torn between bloodlust and the sudden electric possibility of being wrong. Violet drew a breath that trembled through the coat's warmth and met the stranger's gaze. For the first time that day, something inside her uncurled. "Where are you listening from tonight?" Violet's legs refused to remember standing. Gideon solved that by bracing the chair with his boot and offering his forearm, solid as a ridgepole. When her weight listed, he bore it without comment until balance returned. The coat he'd wrapped around her was rough-spun and warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke, pine pitch, and the iron-cold breath of the high country. Under its shelter, the square shrank. The jeers dulled, and the shame that had blistered her skin cooled to a livable ache. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can try." They took 3 steps. Someone spat. Someone else muttered that the town would go hungry if her sort were allowed to pilfer. Violet's throat tightened. She had not pilfered. She had waited until the kitchen girls dragged a split sack of meal to the refuse heap behind the storehouse, spoiled by meltwater and tear. The pigs would have had it by nightfall. She had taken 2 fistfuls and paid for it in rope and public hunger. Gideon slowed so she could match him, reading the stagger as if it were a language. He placed himself between Violet and the worst of the crowd, and with the smallest shift of his shoulders, made a wall out of his body. The mayor's boots approached, iron-tipped and sure. "Ravencrest law stands," Blackwood announced. "You will put her back in that chair." "Then fetch your paper and judge," Gideon said without looking away from Violet's path. "Hold your trial, or are you afraid the facts won't bear a gallows?" A ripple of unease traveled through the onlookers. Facts were troublesome things, especially when men had been certain. "That girl's a mouth to feed," the mayor snapped. "She contributes nothing." Violet found her voice. It sounded small, but it did not crack. "I mend. I scrub floors at the boarding house when they let me. I carry coal. I wasn't stealing from anyone." "Liar," a woman hissed, but softly now, as if the word doubted itself. Gideon lifted his chin toward the church. "If you mean to judge, do it where men swear oaths and face God, not in a yard where boys throw stones." His eyes cut to the mayor. "Or you can test whether you have enough men to stop me from walking." No one moved. The winter light thinned. The saloon piano faltered and fell quiet. Shame, once a pack animal everyone had wanted to ride, balked in its traces. Blackwood's lip curled. "Take her then, and take your sanctimony with you. But if she sets foot in Ravencrest again, I'll see the sentence carried out." Gideon's answer was to guide Violet forward. He did not hurry her, although every instinct in Violet urged a sprint. Instead, he made a study in patience, let dignity set their pace, and by the time they reached the alley behind the mercantile, the square had dropped away like a cliff face, the voices of the town scrabbling somewhere below, unable to climb after them. He found a sheltered spot behind stacked cordwood and crouched to Violet's level. "Let me see your wrists." The rope had gnawed them raw. He cut strips from the lining of his coat pocket, dipped them in melted snow from a kettle he carried on the saddle, and bound her hands with a competence that felt like mercy. He did not ask questions first. He fixed what could be fixed, then folded the knife away and finally settled on one quiet inquiry. "What's your name?" "Violet Hayes." "Gideon Stone," he said, as if that could be taken or left as she pleased. "Tell me how long you've been alone." "Since spring," she said. "I was born in a wagon headed nowhere. My mother died when I was 12, my father when I was 15. I came south with a freight team, traded work for a ride, and stayed when the snow pinned me here. I take what jobs they'll give, but there's always a reason to pay me last or not at all." She tried to smile, and it wavered. "I suppose hunger makes a thief of anyone, if you don't look too closely." He didn't flinch. "Hunger makes a truth-teller of a man. It tells you exactly what you lack." "And what do you lack, Mr. Stone?" He paused as if weighing whether that was a question he owed the world. "Peace," he said at last. "Haven't found it in town dust yet." He rose and offered the crook of his arm again. They skirted the livery. Gideon's horse lifted its head, big, dun-colored, with a Roman nose and a winter coat that looked fit for blizzards. Gideon eased Violet up onto a folded blanket just inside the stall, not yet in the saddle, only high enough to rest her legs and let the blood return to her feet. He poured coffee from a blackened tin, then thought better of it and added a finger of cream from a corked bottle. "Sip slow," he said. "Food to follow." "I've no coin," she blurted, panic nipping. "Nothing to pay for a ride or a meal." "You pay by breathing," he said. "Not fainting in snow is the fee I'm after." Something in her unknotted again. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "You could have ridden through." "Because I remember what a crowd can do when it stops being neighbors," he said. "Because a man with a whip doesn't always know where he's truly aiming. Because you looked cold." He said it with no ornament, and it landed heavier than any speech might have. He fetched a heel of bread and a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag, softened them in the coffee steam, and split the portion even. When she tried to push the larger piece to him, he pushed it back. "Eat. I'll make more. What will you do with me?" The words came raw, because the world had taught her that every kindness wore a hook. "Walk you out of Raven Crest," he said. "Put you by my fire until you're steady. After that, we talk options. A job on a line camp if you want one. Work up at my place mending gear until the thaw if that suits better. Or I take you to the next town and vouch for you with the storekeeper there. You decide, not me." Violet studied his face for the trick. It seemed carved to withstand winters more than words, but there was gentleness in the angles around his eyes, the kind that arrives only after weather has sanded a man's edges and left what matters. "People won't be pleased you took me," she said. "They'll call you a fool." "They can call me late for supper," he said. "I'll live." They moved again when the light thinned to pearl and the first snow grains started to fall. Gideon swung into the saddle and lifted Violet up with him, careful as if hoisting a wounded bird. The horse stepped into the street, and the valley air met them like a clean blade, cold but honest. Behind them, the town retreated into its lamps and grudges. Ahead, the eastern hills gathered dusk like folded wings. Violet leaned back enough to feel the steady thud of the man's heart through his coat. It seemed impossible that an hour could stretch so far between ruin and rescue, and yet here she was, moving toward an unknown that, for the first time in months, did not terrify her. "Hold on," Gideon said, and the words were plain, but sounded like a promise. Snow fell harder as Raven Crest shrank behind them, dissolving into a gray blur at the base of the hills. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather, the slow huff of Gideon's horse, and the soft clink of iron as his rifle brushed against the stirrup. The world narrowed to a rhythm, hoof-beats, breathing, wind. Violet sat before him, wrapped in his coat, her hands buried in the fur collar. Every shiver of her body brushed against his chest, and though he kept his face turned to the trail, Gideon felt each tremor like a blow. "How far?" she whispered. "Till dark, maybe less," he said. "There's an old line cabin by the creek. We'll stop there." The wind picked up, scattering fine snow that sliced across her cheeks. She pressed closer to him, more from instinct than courage, and Gideon felt the faintest sigh against his throat. "Sleep if you can," he said. "I'll wake you when it's safe to walk again." "I can't," she murmured. "If I close my eyes, I'll see their faces." He didn't answer, but his arm around her waist tightened slightly, steadying her in the saddle. The trail wound upward, narrow and half buried in snow. Pines bent low under the weight of ice, their branches whispering as if gossiping about the strangers trespassing through their hush. Gideon moved with the patience of a man who knew every bend by heart. His horse followed, without command. After an hour, they reached a narrow ridge where the land fell away on both sides, a white void below, wind howling through the cut. Violet gasped, clinging tighter to him. "Don't look down," he said softly. "Look at the horizon, always the horizon." She obeyed. Ahead, the mountains loomed like sleeping beasts under blankets of snow. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the cabin, and maybe warmth. When they reached the tree line, Gideon reined in and swung down first. He lifted Violet as though she weighed nothing. Her boots sank into the snow to her ankles, but she managed to stand. He led her to a fallen log, swept the snow away with a gloved hand, and said, "Rest. The horse needs a breather, too." Violet nodded, clutching the coat tighter around herself. Her lips were pale, almost blue. Gideon poured water from a skin into a tin cup, then poured half of it out, replacing it with whiskey. He offered it to her. "Drink. It'll burn, but it'll warm you." She took a cautious sip, coughed, and blinked tears from her eyes. "That's awful," he almost smiled. "That's how you know it's working." After a few moments of silence, Violet said quietly, "You shouldn't have helped me. Now they'll hate you too." "They already did," Gideon said. "They just hadn't said it out loud yet." She turned to look at him. "Why do you live up here?" "Because I got tired of listening to men justify cruelty," he said simply, "and tired of being one of them." The honesty in his voice stunned her. He wasn't boasting, just confessing. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression, cut in gray light, all harsh bone and quiet regret, kept her silent. They rode again. As night began to fall, the snow turned to flurries, then to thin, floating ice crystals. A line of dark smoke soon appeared between the trees, thin but visible. Gideon exhaled in relief. Almost there. The cabin was small and weathered, half buried under snowdrifts, but smoke curled from its chimney, evidence of an earlier fire still alive beneath the ashes. Gideon opened the door with a heavy shoulder shove and ushered her inside. The scent of pine pitch and old wood greeted them. "Sit by the hearth," he said. "I'll get it going." Violet sank down near the stone fireplace. Her fingers trembled too badly to untie her boots, so Gideon crouched and did it for her, pulling them off one at a time. Her socks were soaked, her toes red with cold. He wrapped them in a wool blanket and set them close to the growing fire. "Better?" She nodded. "You shouldn't do all this." He stirred the coals with a poker. "If I didn't, you'd be dead before morning." She hesitated. "Then I suppose, thank you." The fire brightened, throwing gold across the cabin walls. Gideon filled a pot with snow and hung it above the flame. "When that melts, we'll make stew. There's venison jerky, a few carrots, maybe even beans." Violet's eyes widened. "Beans? In winter?" He gave her a look almost teasing. "You doubting my supplies?" "No," she said softly. "Just, I haven't had beans since spring." He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a clean piece of cloth and a small tin. "For your wrists. It'll sting. Pine salve always does. But it keeps the skin from cracking." She obeyed, wincing as she rubbed the salve in. The smell of resin and smoke filled the air. Outside, the storm deepened. Wind rattled the shutters. Gideon checked the latch and added another log to the fire. Then he turned to her. "You can sleep there," he said, nodding to the cot by the wall. "It's not soft, but it's dry. And you?" "I'll take the floor." "But it's your cabin." "It's just a roof," he said, "and tonight it's yours." Violet looked into the fire for a long time before whispering, "Why are you kind to me?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Because once someone was kind to me when I didn't deserve it, and I never got to repay her." The meaning of that sank into Violet's chest like a slow ache. She opened her mouth to ask who that woman was, but Gideon had already turned away, his back lit by firelight, his silence heavy with things he wasn't ready to say. She watched him add wood to the fire, watched the muscles move beneath the rough wool of his coat. For the first time in her short, bruised life, she felt a strange safety, not the kind that came from walls or locks, but from the quiet certainty that this man, for reasons she didn't yet understand, would rather die than see her harmed. Outside, snow swept down in silver sheets, hiding every track they'd left behind. Inside, the fire caught strong, the warmth expanding until it filled the little cabin like a living thing. Violet's eyes grew heavy. Before sleep took her, she whispered almost to herself, "I don't think I've ever been this warm." Gideon, still staring into the flames, murmured back without turning, "Then you were never where you belonged before." Morning came slowly on the mountain. Light seeped through the shutters in thin gold lines, spilling across the wooden floor where Gideon had slept beside the fire. He was already awake, whittling a strip of pine to use as kindling. When Violet stirred, the first thing she saw was his back, broad, steady, motionless, except for the rhythm of the knife-carving wood. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming. The blanket over her smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. Then the memory of the town square struck her like cold water. She sat up sharply, heart pounding. "You're safe," Gideon said without turning. "No one followed us." Violet exhaled, shaking slightly. I thought it was all a dream." "It wasn't," he replied. "But you're here now, and alive." He set down the knife, stirred the embers, and added a few sticks to coax the fire higher. The faint hiss of sap filled the silence. A kettle of water hung above the flame, and the smell of coffee drifted through the air. "I didn't mean to sleep so long," Violet murmured. "You needed it," Gideon said. "You'd been half-starved and frozen. The mountain will wait." He handed her a tin cup filled with hot water steeped in pine needles. "Drink that. It'll help your lungs after all that smoke yesterday." She sipped cautiously, wincing at the bitter taste. "You drink this every morning?" "When the weather's bad," he said. "Keeps a man alive, even when he doesn't much want to be." Violet looked at him over the rim of the cup. There was something in the way he said it, matter of fact, but lined with a sadness she didn't understand yet. She wanted to ask, but didn't. Not today. When she finished the tea, Gideon rose. "Come," he said. "If you're strong enough to stand, I'll show you what needs doing. The mountain doesn't forgive idleness." Outside, snow still fell, but lighter now, soft flakes floating through the morning air. The forest was silent except for the creak of trees and the distant rush of a half-frozen creek. Gideon led her to the small clearing behind the cabin, where a shed leaned beneath the weight of snow. "I'll chop wood," he said. "You can start by sweeping the snow off the steps and stacking what's dry by the door. Keep it covered with that tarp, otherwise we'll have damp logs by nightfall." Violet nodded. "I can do that." He gave her a broom fashioned from tied twigs, rough but sturdy. Her fingers were clumsy at first, but she worked without complaint. When her arms tired, she switched hands. Gideon worked beside her in silence, the sound of his axe echoing against the mountain slope. Each swing was precise, controlled. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, fascinated by the strength in his movements, the way the wood split cleanly each time, like it was surrendering to him. By midday, her back ached, her hands blistered, and her cheeks were flushed red from cold. But when she looked at the neat pile of wood by the door, pride bloomed quietly in her chest. Gideon came over, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "Good," he said simply. "You work hard." "No one's ever said that to me before," she murmured. He frowned slightly, as if that fact unsettled him. Then they never looked close enough. They went inside, where Gideon ladled out a simple stew, meat, beans, and carrots boiled together until tender. He handed her a bowl first, then sat across from her. "It's better with salt," he said, "but I ran out last week." Violet took a spoonful. "It's perfect." He gave her a brief, almost shy glance. "You're easy to please. I've gone hungry too many times to be otherwise." For a while they ate in silence. Only the fire crackled between them. Then Violet asked softly, "Do you ever go back to the towns?" "Sometimes," Gideon said, "when I need supplies, when winter loosens its grip." "They don't like you, do they?" He smiled without humor. "No. I remind them of the things they'd rather forget." "What things?" "That the world isn't kind," he said, "and that men who pretend it is are usually the cruelest." The words hung in the air. Violet didn't reply. She only watched him, the set of his jaw, the rough scars along his forearms, the way his voice carried more grief than anger. There was something heavy he wasn't telling her, something that lived in the shadows behind those gray eyes. Later that afternoon, the sky cleared. Gideon fetched a small bundle of pelts from the wall and began brushing them clean. "These are beaver," he said, "worth something come spring. When the roads open, I'll trade them for coffee and flour." Violet hesitated. "Can I help?" He looked up. "You don't have to." "I want to." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Here." He handed her a soft brush and showed her how to move it gently along the grain of the fur. Her hands were awkward at first, but she watched his movements and matched his rhythm. After a while, she forgot the cold entirely. They worked side by side until dusk painted the cabin in gold and amber light. When the last pelt was cleaned, Gideon hung them to dry. Violet rubbed her hands, now red but warm. "I think I'm getting better at this," she said, smiling faintly. He nodded. "You learn fast." She turned toward the fire. "It feels strange," she said, "to be useful." "You always were," he said quietly. "The town just didn't see it." She blinked back sudden tears. "You say things like that so easily." He set down the brush and met her gaze. "Because I mean them." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire popped, sending sparks into the chimney. Violet looked down, blushing, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. As night deepened, Gideon handed her a folded quilt. "You should sleep early. Tomorrow we'll check the traps." "Will you sleep?" she asked. He shrugged. "A few hours. I'll keep the fire going." She hesitated. "Do you ever get lonely here?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer silence to lies." Violet watched him from her cot, the flames flickering across his face. She realized that beneath the hard edges he wasn't made of stone at all. He was made of grief, and the quiet strength it took to live with it. "Gideon?" she whispered. "Hmm?" "Thank you for saving me." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "You saved yourself. I just carried you out of the crowd." But Violet saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't believe that, and neither did she. Outside, the wind howled across the ridge, but inside the cabin, warmth pooled thick as honey. Violet drifted to sleep with the firelight painting her face and the faint sound of Gideon humming an old forgotten tune, a lullaby maybe, for someone who never got to hear it. For the first time in years, she dreamed of a tomorrow that wasn't cruel. Winter thickened around the cabin like a closing fist. For weeks, the world outside turned white and soundless, and the snow piled high against the shutters. Gideon and Violet settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Mornings began with the hiss of boiling water and the smell of wood smoke. Afternoons passed with quiet work, mending traps, chopping wood, brushing pelts. When the light faded early, they sat by the fire and spoke little. But silence can grow heavy when it's shared too long. One evening, while Gideon sharpened his knife, Violet asked softly, "Why do you live up here alone? You said you left the towns because of cruelty, but there must be more than that." Gideon's hand stilled on the whetstone. For a long time, the only sound was the blade's soft rasp. "There's always more," he said finally, "but not all stories need telling." "I think they do," she said gently. "Sometimes silence is heavier than the truth." He lifted his eyes to her, the gray in them shifting like storm clouds. "You think that because you haven't lived long enough with ghosts." "Maybe," she said, "but ghosts don't leave just because you stop speaking their names." Something flickered across his face, pain, sharp and unguarded. He set down the knife. "Her name was Isabel," he said quietly. "She was my wife." Violet froze. "Was?" "She died 7 years ago," he said. "We lived up here together. She loved the snow, the quiet, the way the air smells after a storm. We thought this place could keep the world out, but it couldn't." He told her then slowly, like a man reopening an old wound, about the blizzard that trapped them in their first winter, about Isabel's pregnancy, the fever that came, the desperate ride through whiteout winds to reach a doctor who never made it back alive. He spoke until his voice broke. Violet listened without a word, her heart aching for a woman she'd never met and for the man who'd never forgiven himself. When he finally fell silent, she said only, "It wasn't your fault." He gave a bitter smile. A man who holds his wife's hand while she dies never truly believes that. Violet wanted to reach out, to take his hand, but something in his posture, the iron stillness, kept her still. "Why did you help me, Gideon?" she whispered. He stared into the fire. "Because when I saw them tying you to that chair, I saw her, the same fear in your eyes, the same way the world decided what you were worth before you had a chance to speak." The words lodged in her throat. "And now? What do you see when you look at me?" Gideon hesitated. His voice came low, rough. "Someone I don't know how to look away from." The air between them thickened, fragile as glass. Violet's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, a sharp noise outside shattered the moment, the sound of boots crunching snow. Gideon was on his feet instantly, his rifle in hand. He moved to the window, peeled back the curtain just enough to see. "2 men," he muttered, "coming up the path." "From town?" Violet's voice trembled. "Maybe." His jaw tightened. "Stay behind me." The knock came, loud and demanding. Gideon opened the door halfway, blocking the view inside. The wind rushed in, carrying snowflakes and the smell of sweat and whiskey. "Evening, Stone," the taller man drawled. He wore a sheriff's star half-polished and a sneer that didn't match it. "We're looking for a thief. Fat girl, red hair, answers to Violet Hayes." Gideon didn't move. "She's not here." The sheriff smiled thinly. "Funny. Got word she ran off with a mountain man. Folks are angry. Town wants her brought back to finish her punishment." "She's innocent," Gideon said. "That's not what the papers say." The man stepped closer. "Now, we can do this easy, or—" The door slammed before he could finish. Gideon slid the iron bar across it. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Violet's breath came quick. "They'll kill you if they find me." "They won't," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." That night, neither of them slept. Gideon sat by the window with his rifle across his knees. Violet lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, guilt twisting in her chest. By morning, she'd made up her mind. When Gideon stepped outside to check the traps, she packed what little food she could and wrapped herself in a spare cloak. She couldn't let him risk his life for her. She had just reached the door when it swung open. Gideon stood there, snow clinging to his hair. His eyes fell to the bundle in her hands. "Where do you think you're going?" "Back," she said. "They're looking for me. If I go, they'll leave you alone." "They won't," he said flatly. "Men like that don't stop when they taste blood." "You saved me once," Violet said, tears in her voice. "Don't waste it by dying because of me." Gideon stepped forward, voice low but fierce. "You think I dragged you out of that square just to let them hang you later? No, you're staying. You can't keep me here." "I'm not keeping you," he said. "I'm protecting you." "From what? From myself?" "From the world," he snapped, and then softer. "And from the part of me that can't lose another woman to it." The words hung heavy between them. Gideon turned away first, fists clenched at his sides. Violet took a shaky breath. "You can't live like this, Gideon, always fighting ghosts." He didn't look back. "Then help me remember what living feels like." Silence. Then, very quietly, she set down the bundle and said, "Then let me try." That night, the storm came back with fury. The wind screamed down the ridge and shook the shutters. Gideon added wood to the fire, his movements rougher than usual. Violet sat beside him, sewing a tear in his coat. When her needle slipped, she pricked her finger. He caught her hand before she could pull away. The cut was small, but he still cradled her palm like something precious. "You've bled enough for one lifetime," he said. "So have you," she whispered. Their eyes met across the flickering light. Slowly, she reached up and touched the scar on his cheek. He didn't move away this time. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the cabin, something fragile and new began to take root, something warmer than the fire. For the first time since the mountain swallowed him, Gideon Stone realized the snow was not silence at all. It was the sound of the world holding its breath, waiting for two lost souls to find each other. By dawn, the storm had broken, but not the danger. The mountains lay still and shining under a skin of frost, deceptive in their quiet. Gideon woke before Violet, stepped outside, and found boot prints in the snow, fresh ones, circling the cabin like wolves testing a fence. He came back in silently and checked the rifle. "They were here," he said, "watching." Violet's hand went to her throat. "The sheriff?" "Or men he paid," Gideon muttered. "Either way, they'll come back when they think I've gone hunting." "What will you do?" "End it," he said. "I'll go down the ridge, meet them before they reach us." She caught his sleeve. "Don't." You'll get killed." Gideon turned, his eyes cold but calm. "If I don't, they'll burn this cabin with you inside it. I won't give them that chance." Before she could answer, the first shot cracked through the air. The window beside her shattered, splinters flying. Gideon grabbed her, dragging her behind the stone hearth. "Stay down," he said, already moving. He shoved open the back door and stepped into the white glare of morning. 5 men came through the trees, Harold Blackwood among them, coat trimmed in fur, arrogance glinting like steel in his eyes. "Well, well," the mayor called, "the mountain beast kept his prize after all." "Go home, Harold," Gideon said evenly. "You've done enough." "I came for what's mine," Harold spat. "That girl belongs to the town." "She belongs to no one." "Then I'll take her corpse." The words hung like smoke. Harold lifted his revolver. Gideon fired first. The sound split the air. One of the men beside Harold dropped into the snow. The others scattered for cover behind pines. Bullets tore through branches, snow bursting into mist. Inside the cabin, Violet clutched the edge of the hearth, praying under her breath. She could hear Gideon reloading, hear the steady rhythm of his boots crunching through snow. She had never heard courage sound like that. So quiet, it drowned out the gunfire. 2 men rushed him from the flank. Gideon pivoted, slammed the butt of his rifle into one, sent the other tumbling into a drift. The rifle clicked empty. He drew his knife. When Harold saw him closing the distance, he panicked. "You're a murderer, Stone. You'll hang for this." "Maybe," Gideon said, voice low, "but not before I end you." He lunged, steel flashing in the morning light. Harold stumbled backward, firing wild. One bullet grazed Gideon's shoulder, the next misfired. In that heartbeat of silence, Gideon seized him by the collar and drove him hard into the snow. "Look at me," he growled. "You think cruelty makes you powerful? You think breaking the weak makes you a man?" Harold's face twisted in fear. "She's filth. You can't save them all." "I don't need to," Gideon said. "Just one." Then he struck, not to kill, but to stop. The blow left Harold sprawled and gasping. Gideon stood over him, chest heaving, the snow around them stained red from his own shoulder wound. "Take your men," Gideon said coldly. "Tell Ravencrest the girl's gone. Tell them she died if it makes you sleep at night. But if any of you come back up this mountain, I'll bury you here myself." The men hesitated, saw the truth in his eyes, and dragged Harold away without another word. When Gideon returned to the cabin, Violet ran to him. Blood streaked his sleeve, his breath came ragged, but his gaze softened at the sight of her. "I told you not to come out," he said, half smiling. "I couldn't breathe until I saw you," she whispered. He swayed. She caught him as his knees buckled, easing him down near the fire. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. It's everything," she said fiercely. "You can't keep saving me and calling it nothing." He looked up at her then, the edges of his vision dimming. "You're wrong, Violet. Saving you was the first thing that ever meant something." She pressed her forehead against his, tears mixing with his sweat. "Then don't you dare die before it means more." Outside, the snow began to fall again. Quiet this time, gentle as forgiveness. Gideon drifted in and out of consciousness for hours, caught between fever and the sound of crackling fire. Every time his eyes opened, Violet was there, wringing cloths in warm water, pressing them to his shoulder, whispering his name as though the sound alone could hold him to life. When the fever finally broke, it was dawn again. Pale light spilled across the wooden floor. Gideon blinked, found her asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still wrapped around his. Her face was soft in the morning glow, exhaustion etched deep but peaceful. He watched her for a long time. The fire had burned low, but the room was warm. The mountains outside were blanketed in a silence that no longer felt empty. When she stirred, her eyes opened slowly, then widened. "You're awake." "I am," he murmured, voice rough. "You didn't sleep?" "I didn't dare," she said, half laughing, half crying. "You kept muttering you were cold." "I was," he said softly, "until you stayed." She brushed tears from her eyes. "You scared me, Gideon. I thought I'd lose you." He reached for her hand, fingers trembling. "You won't. Not any more." For a long moment they just sat in the hush of morning, the air thick with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Violet whispered, "What now? They'll tell the town you're a murderer. They'll come again." "Then let them," Gideon said. "We'll be gone by spring. There are valleys west of here, quiet ones where no one cares who you were." He gave her a faint, crooked smile. "We'll build something new. You, me, and the little one." Her breath caught. "You know?" He nodded. "I knew the moment I saw the way you guarded yourself in the mornings. You thought I didn't notice." She blushed, looking down. "I didn't think you'd want—" "I want everything that comes with you," he interrupted gently, "even the parts the world threw away." Tears slipped down her cheeks again, but this time she didn't hide them. "You saved me from them, Gideon, but more than that, you made me believe I was worth saving." He squeezed her hand. "You were never the one who needed proving. It was me." Outside, the snow began to melt under the new sun. The roof dripped steadily, small streams running down to the frozen earth. Spring was still far, but its promise had already arrived. Later that day, they stepped outside together. The air smelled of pine and thawing soil. The mountains stretched endless around them, wild, untamed, but no longer lonely. Violet turned to him, eyes bright with quiet wonder. "It's beautiful here." "It always was," he said, pulling her close. "I just needed someone to remind me why." She leaned her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath her ear. For the first time since the world had broken her, she felt whole. And for the first time since he'd buried his heart, Gideon Stone felt alive again. In the silence of the mountains, their laughter rose, soft, unafraid, carried away on the wind like a prayer that had finally been answered. Every time I tell a story like Violet and Gideon's, I'm reminded that love isn't born in comfort. It grows from mercy, from the choice to see worth where the world only sees shame. Maybe you're listening from a crowded city or somewhere quiet where the wind sounds like memory. Wherever you are, I hope this story whispered something true, that kindness can save lives and love can rebuild what cruelty tried to destroy. Tell me, where in the world are you hearing this from tonight? And if you still believe in redemption, stay. The next story is already waiting for you.